a potential change in U.S. policy, or at the very least, a real change in the vibes that's coming on. And over the course of the weekend, we have seen a lot of indication of that. Nancy Pelosi, and this is obviously in the wake of the killing of the World Central Kitchen workers. Let me just start by saying how grotesque it is that it takes 7 Western aid workers.
Well, 6 and plus the Palestinian driver.
The Palestinian driver.
Yeah.
But let's be honest. It's the 6 Western aid workers to be killed for people in Washington, D.C. to realize that there's something horrible going on there. Like, it is, I don't know if that means that, like, each Western aid worker is worth 5,000 to 6,000 dead Palestinians that we know of, because like Emma's been saying for a long time, there's now more and more reporting to the effect of, like, there's thousands upon thousands who are missing, of course, and presumed dead. Of course they're dead, because there's no place to hide in Gaza. But with that said, what has changed over the course of the weekend has been, you see media reporting things like this. Like NBC just had a story on the universities that were all blown up by the Israelis.
3 months ago.
And it's literally months and months ago that the last one was blown up.
And you just see, too, how Democrats, when they change their rhetoric, the coverage goes with it, too. Like, that's how Republicans have been so adept at pressuring the media throughout my lifetime. Like, now that some Democrats have woken up, and it's not just white aid workers, too, and people who were feeding people, just the most benevolent human beings risking their lives knowing that they would feed people. And there have been many Palestinian aid workers killed as well.
Oh, yeah.
But it's the fact that these workers worked with this celebrity chef.
Exactly.
This celebrity chef who's personal friends with Nancy Pelosi, apparently, who she in January signed a letter along with some other, I think, McGovern and other Democrats, recommending Jose Andres for the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in Ukraine. So they have a close relationship. And she was one of 40 Democrats, the squad, but like Mark Pocan, Barbara Lee in the House.
Jim McGovern,
who in the wake of this, because of the personal relationship with, and it's infuriating, as you say, but it's still good progress. I'll take what I can get. They signed a letter not saying conditioning aid to Israel, but that Biden should pause military aid altogether right now.
And I want to note too, McGovern we just played that clip not a week ago of protesters in Worcester showing up at a fundraiser that Hakeem Jeffries were there. And, I haven't been involved in Worcester politics for a long time, but I can't imagine there's too many places that Jim McGovern goes in Worcester where he gets protested about foreign policy. I can assure you of that. So with all that said, we've got this letter coming out there with Pelosi signing it, and I did not see her video or written apology to Rashida Tlaib, but we'll let that go for the moment.
Or her coming forward with all her CCP money that must be influencing her to say that, as she accused protesters early on of working for China.
I don't want to get sidetracked.
Yeah, I know.
I know. I'm saying I don't want to get sidetracked too. Like, we're both can fall into that hole of, like, what is different now between then and January? Like, an extra 10,000 people? No, we know what the difference is that, celebrity chefs, aid workers were killed horribly, of course. I don't mean to diminish that, but, and on top of which, we saw the Biden administration, both Kirby and obviously Biden had some phone call with Netanyahu saying, we're serious this time. I don't know how serious he was or not, but, Pelosi signing that document, says that allows him at least to say, like, even the people who are your staunchest allies who were willing to say the most ridiculous things 2 months ago are now finding a problem with this. Then yesterday, 330 trucks make it through from Israel into Gaza with aid that came from an Israeli port. That is the most since October 7th. Now, it's nowhere near what they need. It used to be 500 trucks a day prior to October 7th. But what that shows me is that Joe Biden, it turns out, does have some ability to change what Israel does. And if he has the ability to say there's got to be a change and I want aid in there, maybe he also has the ability to say, like, which he also said to Netanyahu, how about actually not sending fake negotiators to the negotiations, but ones that will actually be able to get the hostages returned? I mean, so there is a change. Here is Bernie Sanders on Pod Save America. We just saw, obviously, Tim Kaine, too, was, I think, on the Sunday talk shows talking about this. Kaine, you'll recall, was one of the few senators to boycott when Netanyahu came to speak in front of a joint session of Congress when he was invited by John Boehner during the Obama years. And so the senators are coming out and they're making themselves known publicly, the ones who have been saying this stuff in private. But here's Bernie Sanders on Pod Save America, and also addressing both, like, the issue of Biden pretending to be mad at Netanyahu, and also, like, you know, what young people are going to do in terms about voting, because they're the ones who really care about this issue.
So the White House says that in a call today, President Biden told Netanyahu that, quote, the strikes on aid workers in the humanitarian situation are unacceptable. He underscored that an immediate ceasefire is essential and said that, quote, U.S. policy with respect to Gaza will be determined by our assessment of Israel's immediate action to address civilian harm, humanitarian suffering, and the safety of aid workers. How do you take that statement? Do you take that to mean that he might be finally ready to budge on conditioning aid?
As you know, there have been a lot of statements.
Yes.
I mean, one day I'm angry. You know, the president is angry at Netanyahu. The next day he's very angry.
Right.
And the next day he's very, very angry. You know, so what? At the same time, there is support for more military aid. We're talking about $10 billion in a supplemental bill that I voted against. For that reason, I'm not going to give Netanyahu another $10 billion in military aid to continue to kill women and children in Gaza. Now, I hope, I mean, the president is not stupid. And I know the president, and he is at his heart a very decent human being. So I know he's hurting from what's going on. Now, why they have continued this policy, if you ask me that question, I cannot give you an answer. I have some speculation, I have some guesses, but I won't even say it publicly. I don't know why. But I would hope that the president understands that from a moral perspective and from a political perspective, because that young Palestinian in Michigan is not the only person. The polls are very clear. A majority of the American people, I think the last poll I saw was like 52%, think the United States should stop military aid to Israel, and among Democrats and among young people, the numbers are much higher. So the president is now engaged in a very, very difficult campaign. So from a moral perspective and from a political perspective, I hope very much that what he's saying today really does indicate a change of policy. But we will know. You cannot continue to talk about your worries about humanitarian situation in Gaza and then give Netanyahu another $10 billion or more bombs. You cannot do that. That is hypocritical.
What, in your view, would it look like for the president to match his words with actions? And do you think that the president himself would be able to stop, congressional funding of further aid to Israel?
I think the answer is pretty simple. Mr. Netanyahu, I'm here to inform you that if the border is not open tomorrow, if thousands of trucks do not get in to start feeding starving people, all military aid will cease. Have a nice day.
I mean, I appreciate that more aggressive posture towards Biden here, because we know that Bernie Sanders feels like Biden is someone he's been able to work with during his time in the Senate. They have a friendlier relationship than that I think has maybe contributed to Bernie Sanders holding back some criticism. But being clear there that it's the rhetoric is not matching the actions is really important. So Bernie is, it should have been him. We all know this. But this, when listening to that, it reminded me, I had meant to highlight this to you, Sam. Did you see this Jonathan Geyer piece in the American Prospect? I just sent it. Bradley, if we could pull this up, because this was amazingly insightful into Biden's mentality, and it also dovetailed very nicely with some of the things I learned in my interview with Anel Sheline when she resigned from the State Department. This part here, the reason for Joe Biden's particular brand of Israel policy is Joe Biden. People who worked with him throughout his 45-year career as senator and then vice president say that on this issue, he is Zionist and pro-Israel, and he means it. He's been close with every Israeli prime minister since Golda Meir, as he reminds audiences, and his go-to one-liner is, if Israel didn't exist, we would have to invent it. For Biden, Israel is not just a foreign policy issue. As Haim Saban, the Israeli-American businessman who's raising millions for the re-election campaign, puts it, Biden is pro-Israel in his gut. It's in his kishkas. I think that's how you say it. I have no idea.
Well.
Okay. No. Yes.
Yes. It's good enough.
Okay. Biden at times has been forward-thinking on domestic policy and flexible in updating his old school thinking when it comes to anti-monopoly policy or reproductive, eager to listen to workers on the issues they care about. On foreign policy, he has often strayed from the Washington establishment, withdrawing from Afghanistan and avoiding knee-jerk hawkishness on China. Not so on Israel and Palestine. And that willingness to buck the establishment has given him confidence in the face of outside criticism and an allergy to changing course. So that is really important, because we've noted that the difference between what Lloyd Austin is saying and what the administration is saying has been different and divergent from the beginning, where there's much more of an anxiety from like the Pentagon and from people who are in the blob, whatever you want to call it, the foreign policy establishment, because they worry about what unbridled support for Israel does to our regional standing and our objectives in the region. But there's a massive political Zionist force within the U.S. government, also AIPAC and all of their influence that contributes to it. But one more portion that I wanted to highlight, because this was the part that Anel said or indicated, and this is, I think, proof of it. Biden was the first Democratic president, you got to scroll down a bit, in a generation to not show a serious effort toward a Palestinian state. The idea was to keep the Middle East, a perennial career killer, off the president's desk. That led to a diplomatic void and the further disenfranchisement of Palestinians, which likely contributed to the current war. There were a handful of minor economic summits between Israel, the U.S., and Arab states where settler violence surged in the West Bank. Even before the October attacks, Israeli human rights watchdog Yesh Din called in 2023 the most violent year in settler violence against Palestinians in the West Bank, in both the number of incidents and their severity, which highlights just how late the Biden administration has been in sanctioning of Israeli settlers. And then this part here. Running point from the White House is Brett McGurk, the National Security Council's coordinator for the Middle East and North Africa, who worked on Iraq and the Bush, Obama, and Trump administrations. McGurk said early on that Biden was pursuing a back-to-basics approach to the Middle East, but it's unclear where the U.S. would be going back to. Basically, so this is what she said to me, was that her assessment is that Brett McGurk is the one who is
driving this.
Who is driving this.
Yeah,
so,
he's horrible. And you remember that early plan he had laid out? I'm also be curious as to what McGurk's attitude is towards Iran, because it was one of the big mysteries that we had covered. And I don't want to be, I don't want to overstate this, but one of the things that we'd been very unclear on is why Biden didn't just go in and re-up the Iranian nuke deal that we thought he was going to do. And it didn't seem like it would have been too difficult to do, frankly. Certainly not politically. I mean, they passed the American Rescue Act and the Republicans were talking about Dr. Seuss for 6 weeks. They, honestly, he could have done that easily at that time.
Right.
And it becomes clearer if you have this guy McGurk in there, and I would imagine he is a big hawk on Iran. Now, I haven't seen any reporting to this, but this is all my guess. This is all my speculation. But the idea, I mean, this is what is really completely nuts, because you talked about Lloyd Austin, basically saying, and I think a lot of it was also just military doctrine, like this country's history has been sort of like marred for 50, 60 years at this point. Now, with our experience in Vietnam and understanding the counterinsurgency, like what Israel's trying to do in regards to Hamas at this point is impossible. And they know this. And certainly Lloyd Austin knows it. He said, you can win a battle, but you will lose the war regardless. But when you see stuff like in the middle of this, Israel is striking an Iranian consulate in Syria. You got to ask yourself, even if you're the biggest Israeli supporter in the world, why in the world would they be doing that? Mm-hmm. Why in the world, when you are increasingly being made a pariah in the world, would you provoke a response from Iran by doing something that was a blatant disregard of international law? And of course, they're all sitting there, Israel now is like, they're all terrified. And partly was to probably generate that domestic fear so that if there is any type of, and we're starting to see some protests against the actual continuance of the assault on Gaza in Israel. It's by no means like a, mass, but we're seeing some. But the idea that we now have Iran basically on a daily basis, it sounds like, contacting the Americans going like, we're not going to attack. We're not going to attack. We don't want to get drawn into this either. Israel is
they're
explicitly trying to spark a regional war.
Yes.
And
drawing us in.
And that's
if Iran attacks Israel.
That's it. I mean,
how is Biden? Netanyahu knows how Biden's going to respond in that instance. So, I mean, I just found I couldn't recommend this Geyer piece in the American Prospect more highly because it's just so comprehensive, and it goes to and he also later on, does talk about how there is the Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner has been a bit of a moderating force or attempting to make some sort of gains in that way. But McGurk has lasted multiple administrations, Trump, Bush, and Obama. And this kind of his thinking on this clearly is not helping matters, but also the fact that, you see how Biden is operating from a gut level. I remember hearing that about George W. Bush when he used to talk about how he feels like,
I looked in Pootie Poot's eyes
and I deal with it in my gut. Man. Like, this is not a way to clearly to put forward a foreign policy that is going to be coherent in any way, but that his gut feel was Afghanistan, withdrawing from there, and now his gut feel in this way is just to support Israel through and through. That seems to be changing at least slightly, but it does explain how basically he's petulant in this way, and I don't believe that it's necessarily gotten better with age, his tendency to operate from the gut.
Yeah, hard to know if it's, I don't know if it's just petulance or just, I think he just also doesn't seem to consider Palestinians to be actually human beings. All right, but if there's any message for today, there's two of them. One is, let's put up this graphic of the reporting about the 330. First, that'll come second. But first, I want the 330 aid trucks going in. 332 aid trucks entered.
22.
322 aid trucks entered Gaza yesterday. That tweet is from Sunday. That, for all the people who have said, you could take that down now, for all the people who have said that Joe Biden didn't have the ability to influence Israel. I give you that. And also, let's be clear. Again, he's doing this because the guy who had the first Michelin restaurant in Washington, D.C., had his aid workers killed by Israel. And then the other message of the day is this. The UN says Israel, this is from the Times of Israel, from just on the 6th. So this was just on Saturday, the day after. The UN says Israel approved reopening of 20 bakeries, water pipeline in northern Gaza. If you are one of those people who still somehow manage to believe that Gaza had any type of autonomy, that the Palestinians there, they had 20 years to build their paradise there. Because, it was actually 18 years ago that the Israelis pulled out. And they had it all. You try and build your paradise when some other country has the ability to say, we're not going to allow you to open a bakery, or you're not going to have water. They do the same thing with electricity. And frankly, they do the same thing with calories, literally calories.
Yep.
So those two lies, I hope, are done. We're done sort of pretending that stuff. And hopefully we'll see more stories from the mainstream media about the total destruction of the universities in Gaza, the total destruction of the hospital facilities. On and on. It's just absurd at this point. And there was one, I wanted to pull this out too. Oh, the other thing in terms of like ethnic cleansing, right? I mean, if you don't want to call it a genocide, have fun with that. But there's stories in the Wall Street Journal, because we keep hearing over and over again about Hamas won't negotiate. Israel is basically saying they're only going to allow 60,000 residents to return to northern Gaza, the north part of Gaza. I mean, that's definitionally ethnic cleansing.
And what is there to return to? I mean, there's nothing.
What do they have in Rafah? The bottom line is, you're in a tent city in Rafah. If you're in a tent city, at least in the north, and aid's coming in, it's just easier to service people when they are not as densely packed in that way, in terms of water, in terms of bread, in terms of 20 bakeries that are allowed to open in the north or whatever it is. I mean, the whole thing is just the amount of just crap that is served up to justify what Israel has been doing has been just insane. But we should move on because we have. But one more piece of information. CNN's reporting that an Israeli doctor who's working on some of the patients that came out of Gaza is reporting that handcuffs have been dug so deeply into the prisoners' arms that amputations of their hands is becoming routine. These are camps that they're being thrown into, and with really no little explanation, bound for days, blindfolded, defecating in diapers, and being basically kept without food except what comes through a straw. So these are extremely obvious images of genocide, but the Western press is beginning to absorb it, I guess. And I mean, hopefully more actions follow. The fact that Biden is now having these products made in the occupied West Bank being labeled as such is kind of incredible, given the fact that in the majority of states in this country, boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning Israel is literally illegal. What are we supposed to do with that information? One is one issue voter. Sam, I want to be a one-issue voter to stop the funding of Israel and stop the genocide and push for a permanent ceasefire. Well, A, you can't be.
There's no such thing.
There's no such thing. In addition to being a one-issue voter, I think being a mistake, largely, but you do you. There is no one you can vote. I mean, Emma just said, Biden is now insisting that products made in the West Bank have that label when they come in. That is reversing a Trump decision in 2020 before he was out of office to have everything out of the West Bank called from Israel. The Abraham Accords, the movement of Jerusalem, the idea that Trump would have done anything different, I think is just fantastical. But if you think that Donald Trump is going to come in and in the event that he's going to be the one to put the brakes on Israel, I think you're nuts.
I think Donald Trump might say end the war, end the slaughter, but once that's done, you know who's going to be coming in? His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to develop the Gaza Strip into the luxury developments that they've been coveting. He brags to this day about how he gave them the Golan Heights, which is worth trillions of dollars, whether that be real estate or frickin', oil reserves under the ground, whatever the case may be. He may care about the optics of the genocide, but he definitely doesn't care about, he actually definitely covets the idea of ethnically cleansing the land for profit.
I would also say, he says, I am unable to see how Biden is the lesser of two evils. Can you help me understand how Trump will be worse if he said, and we know that he cares about public perception and image amongst world leaders who are increasingly turning his backs to Israel. Well, first off, if you're going to be a one-issue voter and you're really not making a lesser of two evils assessment. You're just being a one-issue voter. And in that respect, if there is no ceasefire by the time that you're faced with your opportunity to vote, I mean, voting for Trump, if you believe Donald Trump is going to do something different and is going to come in and force Israel to end the war in November, or whatever it is, 10th, then that's not an illogical vote. More than likely, there will be a ceasefire at that point. And I would be much more comfortable with a Democratic administration than a Trump administration when it comes to rebuilding Gaza.
You're making a mistake to assume that it's just the one guy making a decision, Trump making it. It's the coalitions that they bring and the people that can pressure them.
On Israel, like, if there's no ceasefire by November 6th of this year, I don't think it's illogical to say that Trump is better. If that's the one issue you're only going to vote on, then that's the one issue you're going to vote on.
But even that, the party that just had 40 signatories, including the former Speaker of the House, call to cease military aid to Israel is the Democratic Party. And none of that would matter if Trump were in office. None of that would matter. He wouldn't care. And in fact, he might draw.
There's also an argument that if you had 40 or 50 or 100 Democrats calling for a ceasefire, that Trump at that point could not.
Right. Because
he also cares about his Republican coalition at that point. So I don't know. But if you narrow it down to that one issue, you're getting, relatively close to where it makes sense. But I don't think that's going to be the case by then. I would imagine. I would be shocked.
God.